chiropractic at the Rock Health and Wellness Center, and you are listening to Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, coming to you right here from the Rock Health and Wellness Center studios on this beautiful Wednesday, November 15th. And we are, as you know, if you listen to the show on a regular basis, we're excited to be here tonight. It's been an awesome day, and it was kind of one of those things. This is a vitamin D warning for all you people out there. This morning I had 2 or 3 people in a row tell me, "Oh, it's just another Wednesday." And I was like, "Uh-oh, that's not a good sign. We've lost our sunshine. We're not getting our vitamin D. We're starting to get fussy with things, and we're starting to lose our way out there." So that's just a warning shot. If you're not waking up thinking, "Hey, this is an awesome day," then you might consider that maybe your nutrition's not right. Maybe your exercise is not right. Maybe your body is not functioning properly. So, man, we got a show for you. We got a show for you that helps solve all of those problems. And if you just want to listen to it, tell your friends about it. Listen to it every night from 6 to 7 right here at the Rock Health and Wellness Centers on our Facebook page, YouTube, and Twitter, and on 98.7 Walk by Faith Radio and 1420 AM Lubbock Christian Nation. We will bring you the information that might help you have a better day so that you can wake up in the morning and say to yourself, "Man, this is an awesome Wednesday." So that's what we're going to do tonight. Tonight is our book review night, and it's been a few weeks since we've been into The Body by Bill Bryson. It's one of my favorite books, and it's super thick, and he does such an amazing job. It's like when you try to break this book down and just do an overview of it, it's like every other sentence, every sentence or every other sentence is just like more information. So what I've decided to do with it is kind of take it chapter by chapter and just kind of work our way through it and see if we can work our way through it and just break down each chapter as we go and talk about the chapters. And so it just happened. I just happened to get lucky. It wasn't by design. I didn't mean for it to work out this way. I didn't know it was going to work out this way. It just happened to be that chapter 5 is that the chapter we're going to break down tonight is about the brain. Man, how lucky can you get? It would just happen to be that tonight is the night, and that we're going to break down the book, and it just happens to be about the brain. So I guess we're just living right. It's just things are going our way tonight. Because what else would you want to talk about on a Wednesday evening besides the brain? So we're going to get into the book. It's going to be a fun night. Mr. Bryson does a great job writing. He's very thorough. He does his homework. He does a fantastic job, and he's got a great sense of humor. And so it was really a fun book to listen to. And it took me about 8 hours, 16 hours maybe. I don't know how long it took. Maybe it was 2 trips to Ruidoso and back of listening to this book. And it's been great. So we're breaking it down as we go. We've had a good week. We'll get to the book in just a second. We've had a good week. We started off on Monday talking about James and about temptation and the perseverance. Remember, that's what we defined perseverance, and we broke that down. And then last night we talked about that again, and then we got into some leaky gut stuff. So if you need to go back and look, both of those shows were pretty good shows that we got into, and that leaky gut is a thing. And there's a lot of reasons that your gut leaks. I was actually getting ready for another book that we're going to do on the show here in a couple of weeks. It's going to be a little bit controversial, but I was reading that book and there's a part in there that talks about leaky gut, and a sentence was made, and I was like, yeah, so that's actually a thing. That's a thing when you get stuff inside your body that's not supposed to be inside your body. And how it breaks you down and causes all kinds of trouble for you. So those are 2 good shows that we broke down on Monday and Tuesday. So if you want to, you can go back. You can go back to the Rock Health and Wellness Center's Facebook page and watch those shows, or our YouTube channel, which is at Health from the Rock. The at sign at Health from the Rock is the YouTube channel. Just click on live, and it should have all the videos that we've done so far. Should be right there for you. If you want to go back, you can go back and listen to all those if you want to. That's why we keep them up there. So they're good videos to watch. I have a praise today that I wanted to get to before we got to the book. And it was a patient that she's relatively new to the office. We've been taking care of her for several weeks now, but she's kind of new to the program, and you know, what we talk about on the show is exactly what we do in the office every single day. Like I started at 7:30 this morning and adjusted my last patient at 5:45, right before we got on air. Uh, all the patients that we did today, all the adjustments that we did here at the Rock were it was all based on the stuff that we talk about on the show. We're telling you exactly the same thing that we do in the office. We're working on all these things. We're working on your right brain to your left brain. We're talking about the number one thing you can do for yourself is be social. The number two thing you can do for yourself is walk. And the number three thing you can do for your brain is to get your eyes up and move them back and forth. Move your head back and forth and move your eyes back and forth after you get them up above the horizon. So we say those same things to our patients. We have them on our boards. We have them in our exercise room when you go in there and get your movement done. And so this new patient that has been with us for a few weeks, she came in today and she's like, I just have to tell you a story. And she said, I was at the bank and I was stuck in the drive-through line at the bank, and it was taking an extra long time for some reason. And I was sitting there, and I was started to grab my phone, and I thought to myself, no, don't do that. Don't do what Dr. Clemmons tells you to do and get your eyes up. Just take this minute or two that you're having to wait in line at the bank and get your eyes up. And so I did. I got my eyes up and I started just looking out into the clouds, and I saw these two beautiful clouds just merge together into one cloud. And it was such a beautiful sight. And I just felt so great about that I got to see all that. And she said, I wouldn't have seen that if I would have had my eyes down looking at my phone. And I was like, I gave her a big high five. I was like, there you go. Now you're getting started. That's what we're talking about right there. Like that's what we want. It's like those moments. And the there's so much depth in that moment. And I know that I talk about way too much depth. I get it. I talk about way too much depth on the show, but I just think that that's the why behind the whole thing and how it actually works. When you see those clouds merge together and make one big cloud, and you just think about the majesty of that whole thing, and you just think about the the brilliance of and the opportunity that we have on a daily basis to get to see these things. But what nature brings to us is dopamine in the proper dose. It brings us the right amount of dopamine. Think about watching those two clouds, those two big giant clouds merge together. Think about watching that and how long that takes versus how many Instagram reels that you could click through with your thumb in the same amount of time, right? If you're clicking on YouTube, I watch these people. I've got a little number that comes up, tells me how many people are watching the show. I see them come in and out, in and out, in and out on the show. Like it went live on their Facebook page, and all of a sudden they clicked on it, and then they're just like, oh, well, I'm not listening to that tonight. And it goes back and forth because I don't have enough time to listen to that. I'm not going to take the time to listen to that, right? And I gotta scroll through to the next thing. I gotta scroll through to the next thing. I gotta scroll through to the next thing. And what do we get from all that scrolling? We get an increased amount of dopamine and an increased amount of dopamine and an increased amount of dopamine. And it's almost like taking cocaine, and it gets our brain all out of whack because we've got too much of it, right? And that's the opposite of nature. Nature doesn't dole it out that way. You don't get that much dopamine if you're getting dopamine from nature. The dopamine we get from nature is slow released. It's timely and it's perfect. And so those are the things that keep us motivated. That's what it's all about right there, right? And if you just have a little bit, if all you need is a little bit of motivation, then you can get it and it keeps you going. But if you need if you downregulate the receptors in your brain so that you have to take more dopamine in order to get that same response, what ends up happening is you got to have more stimulus, more stimulus, more stimulus, right? Well, I think we've covered that pretty good, but I hope you get that idea that if you've got receptors on the outside of that cell, the cells in your brain, the cells in your whole body, there's receptors on the outside, and that's how and the dopamine will dock with those receptors, and it'll tell the cell what to do, or it'll make the cell respond in a certain way. And if there's too much, there's too much dopamine, the cells will downregulate the receptors, meaning they'll take the receptors off the cell wall. Meaning, if you have 100 receptors on your cell wall for dopamine, they will get rid of 50 of them. They will get rid of 75 of them. And so now you just have 25. You have 25 receptors on the cell wall for dopamine. So in order to get the same response, you got to increase the amount of dopamine. That's why you can't look at your phone for just a minute. You first looked at your phone for a minute, then you looked at your phone for an hour, and now you look at your phone for 2 hours or 3 hours or 6 hours, and you just sit there flipping, like keeping over and over and over again, right? Because you can't get the same reward. You'll be up at 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, looking at your phone. And you've looked at the same stupid videos over and over. And it's just that next one. I need that next one. And that next one is the one I'm looking for, right? And that's what's happening inside your brain. And if you can break yourself from that and get your eyes up and look out into your future, look out into the horizon, you'll get a natural amount of dopamine, and it'll set your brain in a beautiful space right there. So that's what she did, sitting in the bank drive-through line. She put her phone down. She got her eyes up. She saw a beautiful cloud scenario, and she felt really good about it. And I was like, well, that's fantastic. That's good living right there. That sustains you right there. That's something that you can do. So I was proud of her. And I told her, I said, you know what? I'm going to have to tell that story on the show tonight. So and she said, oh, really? And I was like, yep. So there you go. There's your story. And I hope everybody got something from it to make yourself better. So let's get into the book. Let's talk about The Body by Bill Bryson. This is our book review night. We're going to break this down. A Guide for Occupants is what it's called. And he's really, really good. And we've done the first few chapters already. But tonight we're going to break down chapter 5, which is the brain. And I'm just going to it's going to be a lot of just reading through this. And if you have a question, you want to send me a text. Our text line is open, 806-794-0400, or you can send me a message or a chat on Facebook, YouTube, or X, and I'll try to answer those for you as we go. But tonight we're just going to start in on the book, and then we'll just kind of read some stuff and then talk about it as we go in the brain. But he's going to give you a lot of information on the brain, and I think some of it's pretty cool. So first thing he has to start the chapter is chapter 4, The Brain, and it's a little poem by Emily Dickinson. And it says, I hope I can read this properly. The brain is wider than the sky. 4, put them side by side. The one the other will include with ease, and you beside. I would have to read that about 10 times. I would have to read that about 10 times before I understood that whole thing. Poetry came along, and that's on the right side of the brain. And I really think there's some brain damage from too many concussions in my lifetime. So, the poetry was actually part of that was around before language, and it went with song way back in the day. So, the most extraordinary thing in the universe is inside your head, and I 100% believe that. I'm so like. I really can't explain what a cool job it is to be a wellness chiropractor and work on functional neurology. Like, I get to work with the most amazing system in the universe every single day. It is really an amazing system. You could travel through every inch of outer space and very possibly nowhere find anything as marvelous and complex and high functioning as the 3 pounds of spongy mass between your ears. And that's 100% truth right there. It's 75 to 80% water, with the rest split mostly between fat and protein. Pretty amazing that these mundane substances could come together in a way that allows us thought and memory and vision and aesthetic appreciation and all of the rest. The consistency of the brain has been variously linked to tofu, soft butter, or slightly overcooked jello pudding. Yeah, when I was at chiropractic school, we got to work in the cadaver lab, and in our neurology lab, we got to work with brains, and um, there was some there was a lot of learning right there, and it was one of the things that just struck me is how in the heck does this work? Like there's not like little filing cabinets in your brain. Your brain is just mush. It's like overcooked jello. Yeah. It's really interesting. The great paradox of the brain is that everything you know about the world is provided to you by an organ that itself has never seen the world. Yeah, which is kind of interesting because Dr. Huberman would argue that the eyeballs are part of the brain, so you do actually get to see the world, but it has no pain receptors, literally no feeling. Your brain doesn't hurt. So when you get a headache, it's not because your brain aches. It's the outside lining of your head. It's the blood vessels that are running through your head and through your brain, but the brain itself doesn't have pain fibers. To your brain, the world is just a stream of electrical pulses like taps of Morse code. And out of this bare and neutral information, it creates for you, quite literally creates a vibrant, three-dimensional, sensual, engaging universe. Your brain is you. Everything else is just plumbing and scaffolding. Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's like people say I've had these statements before, and people say, "Well, they just say this is just in my head," and I just kind of smile and laugh, and I'm saying, "Yep, that's exactly right. It's in your head, that's for sure, because otherwise you wouldn't know it." And that's it. I don't know how much psychology is. I don't know if you can. I don't even know if it's possible. I'm not trying to make any sort of profound statement, but the psychology, to me, abnormal psychology is abnormal brain function. If you're depressed, if you're anxiety, if you have ADD, if you're schizophrenic, if you're bipolar, if you're whatever your thing is, right? If you got some sort of issue, I just think to me it's abnormal brain function. You're it's you're not crazy. I don't really know that people are crazy. Now there may be some spiritual issues that are going on there that cause some disruption in the whole system, but it's it's a it's abnormal function of the brain. If we really looked into it and we kept working on it, we might could figure it out. So, and there's a lot of people who are trying to figure it out, and there's a lot of things that have been figured out as we've gone along. But just sitting quietly, doing nothing at all, your brain churns through more information in 30 seconds than the Hubble Space Telescope has processed in 30 years. That's what I like about Bill Bryson. He tells you things like that gives you information. So I think that's really cool. Think about that for a second. 30 years worth of the Hubble Space Telescope sending back information to the Earth, and your brain does that in 30 seconds. A morsel of cortex, 1 cubic millimeter in size, about the size of a grain of sand, could hold 2,000 terabytes of information, enough to store all the movies ever made, trailers included, or about 1.2 billion copies of this book. Altogether, the human brain is estimated to hold something on the order of 200 exabytes of information, roughly equal to the entire digital content of today's world, according to Nature Neuroscience. If that is not the most extraordinary thing in the universe, then we certainly have some wonders yet to find. And that's really amazing. Like you're really amazing. You as a human being are really amazing. Your brain is really, really, really amazing. The brain is often depicted as a hungry organ. It makes up just 2% of our body weight, but uses 20% of our energy. In newborn infants, it's no less than 65% of our energy. That's partly why babies sleep all the time and their growing brains exhaust them. They have a lot of body fat to use as energy reserves when needed. Your muscles actually even use more of your energy, about a quarter, but you have a lot more muscles. So per unit of matter, the brain is by far the most expensive of the organs, but it is also marvelously efficient. Your brain requires only about 400 calories of energy a day, about the same as you get in a blueberry muffin. Now, we know that that's not how you get your 400 calories on this show, right? We know dang well that you're not getting a blueberry muffin to supply your brain, but you can. That's about how many calories you need it. So, unlike other parts of the brain, your brain burns its 400 calories at a steady state no matter what you're doing. So, hard thinking doesn't help you slim. So it's not like you can start thinking really hard and lose weight. You're not going to burn up your calories by thinking real hard. In fact, it doesn't seem to confer any benefit at all. An academic at the University of California at Irvine named Richard Hayer used positron emission tomography scanners to find that the hardest working brains are usually the least productive. I had this conversation with a Texas Tech freshman today. She's stressed out about a chemistry exam she's got tomorrow night. And she was talking about studying for 7 hours last night and 6 hours the night before. And I was trying to tell her, one of the things right there, and this is really a cool thing. A lot of us were raised with work ethic. Like we were learned, to work. Doing a 12, 13-hour workday is not any big deal for me. I was raised on a ranch. Like I was raised in athletics. I was raised by a dad that taught me how to work. So there's a lot of times when I will apply that thinking to a lot of different areas of life. And sometimes that thinking pulls me through. It keeps me going and it pulls me through and it gets me out of tough situations. But just work, man. Just keep on working, right? But there are some times that it's detrimental. That's not how everything on earth works. It's not about work ethic. Everything's not about work ethic, and your brain is one of them. And so the most efficient brains he found were those that could solve a task quickly and then go into kind of standby mode. And that's kind of what I was telling that girl. I said, hey, if you want to do really good on that test tomorrow, get some good sleep tonight. Because you actually, what you do with your day, and we've talked about this before, is what you do with your day is you take, just like I've done with this book. What I've done with this book is I've highlighted pages on the book, in the book. And I've gone through here and I've highlighted those things. And that's what your brain does all day long. Your brain highlights the things that it wants to know. And this Dr. Huberman does a great job of explaining this on Huberman podcast. But it will highlight, just like I've highlighted in the book right here, the things that it wants to know. And then when you go to sleep tonight, it will go back through all the things that you did through the day, and it will find the things that you've highlighted, and it will code them into your nervous system and into your memory. It'll code them into the things that you know, right? I'll read this entire book. I'll read this book, and I'll remember for a long, long time, especially if I keep talking about it, I'll remember that I learned in this book that the hardest working brains are usually the least productive. The most efficient brains he found were those that could solve a task and quickly go into standby mode. I'll remember that for a long, long time, but I will not remember that it was Richard Hayer at the University of California, Irvine. I won't remember that because I didn't highlight that. It's not important to me. I don't care necessarily about that. I mean, I appreciate the guy's work, but I don't care about that as much as I want to know the data from the book, right? And that's what we do when we're trying to learn. But we got to go to sleep. We got to go to sleep to remember it. We got to go to sleep to burn it in our memory bank so that we can remember it. And if we attach some sort of emotion to it, something that goes along with it, that's why it's so easy to listen to songs. When you listen to music, I can turn on a George Strait tape from 1987 and I can sing almost all the songs on there because when I learned the song, I had emotion in myself. I was like living the song. I was living the song as I was learning the song, and that's why you have emotion that's tied to it. So if you do have that, you can put that in your brain there. So um, I'll get on with it, but that's something that I think is really cool. By the way, the brain works. You're not more efficient by working your brain harder. It's not the way that your brain works. Work your brain, attach emotion to it, rest it. Work your brain, attach emotion to it, rest it. That's the way the brain works right there. For all its powers, nothing about your brain is distinctly human. We use exactly the same components, neurons, axons, ganglia, and so on, as a dog or a hamster. Whales and elephants have whales and elephants have much larger brains than we have. Through the course, they also have much larger bodies. So it's not necessarily unique right there. Um, An assessment by a Brazilian neuroscientist in 2015 found that the number is more like 86 billion, let's say, of nerve fibers. I'll read that back as soon as we get back. We're coming back. We're going to a break on the radio. So you guys hang on. We're going to do a few messages right here, and then we'll be back in just a few minutes with The Body by Bill Bryson. Yeah, what I was going to say is that for years it was written that the brain has 100 billion nerve cells of neurons, but a careful assessment by a Brazilian neuroscientist, I don't know her name, 20 Susanna something, in 2015 found that the number is more like 86 billion. So a pretty substantial demotion, but you still have 86 billion neurons in your brain. I mean, think about that for a second. Like there's a lot of wiring going on inside the brain. Um, Neurons are. I'll hang on a second. I know the people that are listening to us on the radio, they're going to want to hear this information too. So we'll give just a little bit of a break. If you got any questions, you can send them to me. If you got any comments, you can send them to me. And I, I I'm going to go back while we got just a second and just remind you of the perseverance. If I can find my note right there, because that's what we were working on as we went through. Remember last night we talked about perseverance, a steady persistence in a course of action, a purpose, a state, especially in spite of difficulties, obstacles, or discouragement. You're going to have difficulties, obstacles, and discouragement. You're going to run into those things that try to set you back, and it would be really great to have the opportunity to persevere, to keep going through that and work your way through it. There's so many of those things that happen on a daily basis to all of us. Sometimes we have it's like I had that conversation with one of my guys this morning. He was pretty depressed and angry about what was going on at work, and he wasn't all that fired up about going to work. And I adjusted him before he went to work, and he was telling me he's like, yeah, he's kind of bummed out about what's going on at work. And I said, well, what happened? And he's like, well, a couple guys quit, and now it's just chaotic. And I said, well, see, I said, what's got you angry? And he said, work. Work's got me angry. And I said, no, that's not true. It's not work that's got you angry. It's your definition of work that's got you angry. So tell me what's going on at work. And he's like, well, there's a couple guys that have quit, and it's just really frustrating, and everything's chaotic. And I said, or you could look at it and say, hey, these guys quit. This gives me a great opportunity to show how valuable I am to the company. I can take this opportunity and say, man, thank you for quitting. I'm sure I'm glad those guys quit. Now this gives me a chance to shine right here. And it's just that quickly. You just change the way that you see it, and then you change your definition of it, and it changes the way you feel about going to work. So we had that conversation. Persevere. Stay with it. Okay, everybody, we're back. This is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, and we're breaking down the book, The Body. And so we're talking about the number of neurons. So what I said was that for years it was written that there are 100 billion nerve cells or neurons, but a careful assessment by the Brazilian neuroscientist, his name is Susana Herculano Huzel, in 2015 found that the number is more like 86 billion. So you really have 86 billion neurons inside your nervous system, inside your brain. Like, think about that. That's a lot of neurons. There's a lot of it's almost like it was some sort of design and not some sort of random thing. I'll just throw that out there. Um, so, I'm not going to get too much into the. Well, I will. Maybe he says it different. Neurons are not like other cells, which are typically compact and spherical, round. Most of the cells are round. Neurons are long and stringy to pass on electrical signals from one to another. You ever played? Remember when we were kids? Some of you guys are old enough to remember this, where you tied a string to the end of a cup, and then you stretched the string across a ways, and then you tried to talk into the string and then listen. And you had this long. You had a cup on each end, and then you had this long string in between them. That's what a nerve cell looks like, more than like a red blood cell. If you've ever seen a red blood cell, it's just a round little cell. And so the nerve cell looks more like the cup and the string thing. But at the end of it, instead of having one cup, so the main strand of the neuron is called the axon. That's the string. At its terminal end, it splits into branch-like extensions called dendrites, as many as 400,000 of them. Like, just imagine, there's just like the string comes down, and then all of a sudden, there's just all these cups that are connected at the end of the string. And that's what's called a dendrite. The tiny space between the nerve endings is called a synapse. That's why I liken it to, I heard someone say one time that your brain is like a symphony. It's like all of the pieces, like you can imagine all of the instruments in a symphony that are firing together. It's like an amazing when one nerve impulse travels through that axon and it hits that end and it separates into all those dendrites and it goes to the ones that it wants to. Well, those dendrites are hooked onto another cell, which is the single cup. And that single cup now goes up the string to another set of dendrites where you could have another thousands of them there. And so it's like one nerve impulse, it's just like a symphony that goes on in the brain. And when it's firing properly, it's like a master symphony. Like it is really an amazing unit right there. You get trillions and trillions of connections in there. And in between that is the synapse. So that's where they try to use ADHD drugs and depression drugs and anxiety drugs and all the rest of that. Like they try to, that little synapse, the space between one nerve and the next nerve, there's some chemicals that get sent across that little space. And that's how the nerve impulse travels from one to the next. And that nerve impulse, they try to block that or change the chemistry that's going on right there when you're using those type of drugs. In a single cubic centimeter of brain tissue, each neuron connects with thousands of other neurons, giving trillions and trillions of connections. As many connections in a single cubic centimeter of brain tissue as there are stars in the Milky Way. To quote the neuroscientist David Eagleman, it is in all the most complex synaptic entanglement that our intelligence lies, not in the number of neurons as it was once thought. So it's, I thought that was interesting when I read that sentence just today when I was getting ready for the show, kind of reviewing the things. That's funny how we always use the stars in the sky as the marker, right? We think, because we look up and we see that it just seems so infinite to us. Like there's just so many stars up there, and that kind of becomes our ruler or our gauge to determine how we want to look forward, right? And so I think that's kind of cool how we use that. What is surely most curious and extraordinary about our brain is how largely unnecessary it is. To survive on Earth, you don't need to be able to write music or engage in philosophy. You really only need to be able to outthink a quadruped. So, why do we have to invest so much energy and risk in producing mental capacity that we don't really need? That is just one of the many things about your brain that your brain won't tell you. It's kind of interesting. It gets into the different parts of the brain. At the top, literally and figuratively, is the cerebrum, which fills most of the cranial vault and is the part we normally think of when we think of the brain. That's that big part that's up there in the brain. The cerebrum, from the Latin word for brain, is the seat of all of our higher function. It's divided into two hemispheres, each of which is principally concerned with one side of the body, but for some reason unknown, but for reasons unknown, the wiring is crossed. So the right side of the cerebrum controls the left side of the body, and vice versa, which is really interesting. The right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. The left side of your brain controls the right side of your body. But as far as mapping your body goes, your left side of your brain only sees the right side of your body, but the right side of your brain sees both sides of your body. That's an interesting piece of information. If you have a stroke in your right hemisphere and you lose function in the right hemisphere, you might lose your entire left side of your body, because your left brain will only see the right side of your body. Your left brain won't see the left side of your body. But if you have a stroke in your left hemisphere and you lose some area of that part of your brain, your right brain will map out both sides and it'll still work together. So I think that's just interesting pieces of information. You might think it's interesting too. So the two hemispheres are connected by a band of fibers called the corpus callosum, meaning tough material, or literally calloused body in Latin. The brain is wrinkled by deep fissures known as sulci and ridges called gyri, which give more surface area. The exact pattern of grooves and ridges in brains is distinctive to each individual, as distinctive as your fingerprints. But whether it has anything to do with your intelligence or temperament or anything else that defines you is unknown, according to Bill Bryson. And then you break down the brain from the top. You've got two different lobes, the parietal lobe and the frontal lobe. And then on the bottom, you have the occipital lobe and the temporal lobe. Each broadly specializes in certain things. The parietal lobe manages sensory inputs like touch and temperature. The occipital lobe processes visual information. The temporal lobe principally manages auditory information, though it also helps with processing visual information. It has been known for some years that 6 patches on the temporal lobe, known as face patches, become excited when we look at another face. Though which parts of my face excite which of your patches is still largely uncertain. It's funny how he says that. It seems the frontal lobe is the seat of higher function of the brain: reasoning, forethought, problem solving, emotional control, and so on. It is the part responsible for personality. Ironically, as Oliver Sacks once noticed, the frontal lobes were the last part of the brain to be deciphered. Even in my own medical student days, they called it the silent lobes, he wrote in 2001. So if he's in 2001 and he went to medical school in the 19 something, it's interesting that during that time, they called them the silent lobes. So that's kind of interesting. Underneath all that, you have your cerebellum. And the cerebellum is at the bottom back of the head. The cerebellum, it means little brain in Latin. And although the cerebellum occupies just 10% of the cranial cavity, it has more than half of the brain's neurons. The cerebellum's got a lot going on. And it says right here, it has a lot of neurons, not because it does a great deal of thinking, but because it controls balance and complex movements. And that requires an abundance of wiring. It's really cool. I went and watched, one time I got to go to Disney World, and I watched that little Massimo. I think I've talked about him before. And it took the Honda engineers 20 something years to figure out how to get that little guy to step up one step. He couldn't figure out how to make him step one step up. And I think he said they said it took like 200 chips or something to make him step up. And that's kind of what it's saying right here. The cerebellum, it's not because there's so many neurons, not because it does a great deal of thinking, but because it controls balance and complex movements that require abundance of wiring. There's just a lot of wiring in order for us to stand up and move. All the coordination that happens, all the movement that happens, it takes a lot of wires through there to get that to happen. So that should take us off the hook whenever when we fall down and we say, oh man, I feel so stupid, I fell down. And we always say it. We say it all the time. Everybody says it. Man, I fell down yesterday. I feel so stupid. I was just being dumb and I fell down. You were not being dumb. Gravity takes a lot of wiring to overcome. And if just one of those wires gets a little sideways, or you just have a little glitch in the system just for a second, gravity is going to take you down. So it's a complicated thing to walk. So at the base of the brain, descending from it rather like an elevator shaft, connecting the brain to the spine and the body beyond, is the oldest part of the brain stem. It is the home of our more basic operations: sleeping, breathing, keeping the heart going. The brainstem doesn't get a lot of attention in the popular consciousness, but it is so central to our existence that brainstem death is the fundamental measure of deadness in humans in the United Kingdom. Yeah, when your brainstem stops, that's when you're done. And when everything else stops, your brainstem is going to stop eventually. But that gets into that whole idea between, when we talked about the different levels of the brain, when we were breaking down the body keeps the score. That's that reptilian brain. That's what we're talking about, is that brain stem that basically connects your brain to your spinal cord. That's kind of what we're born with, where we can sleep, breathe, and keep the heart going. Those primitive things, and then it moves up from there. So, scattered through the brain, rather like nuts in a fruitcake, are many smaller structures: the hypothalamus, amygdala, hippocampus, and multiple other ones right there, which are collectively known as the limbic system, from the Latin limbus, meaning peripheral. It's easy to go a lifetime without hearing a word about any of these components unless they go wrong, right? That's kind of what we talk about. And it's hard to do sometimes, because if everything is going right, no one cares. It's only when it starts going wrong. It's like we talk about the amygdala being the fear center of the body and creating all that fear response, right? Well, if you're not scared and you're not having that fear response, then your amygdala is working fine. You don't ever think about it. But if it gets a little bit overactive, it messes up your world. The basal ganglia, for instance, play an important part in movement, language, and thought. But it's only when they degenerate to lead to Parkinson's disease that they normally attract attention to themselves. Pretty interesting statement. The squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of deal right there. Despite their obscurity and modest dimensions, the structures of the limbic system have a fundamental role in our happiness by controlling and regulating basic processes like memory, appetite, emotions, drowsiness, and alertness, and processing of sensory information. The concept of the limbic system was invented in 1952 by an American neuroscientist, Paul D. MacLean. Not all of today's neuroscientists agree that the components form a coherent system. Yeah, that's interesting. The limbic system wasn't invented. It was the limbic system was the concept of the limbic system was invented in 1952. The limbic system's been here for a long, long, long time. The most important component of the limbic system is the hypothalamus, which isn't really a structure at all, but a bundle of neural cells. The name describes not what it does or where it is under the thalamus, but where it is under the thalamus. The thalamus, meaning the inner chamber, is a kind of relay station for sensory information, and it is an important part of the brain. There isn't any part of the brain that isn't important, obviously, but it's not a component of the limbic system. So yeah, I think all the parts of the brain are pretty much important. So the hypothalamus is curiously unimposing, though only about the size of a peanut and weighing barely a tenth of an ounce. It controls much of the important chemistry of the body. It regulates sexual function, controls hunger and thirst, monitors blood sugar and salts, decides when you need to sleep. It may even play a role in part in how slowly or rapidly we age. A large measure of your success or failure as a human being is dependent on this tiny thing in the middle of your head. It's really interesting that all those things all those things are regulated. I mean, do we think about that that the monitoring blood sugar and salts decides when you need to sleep, controls your hunger and thirst? Do we think about that as being a brain thing? Do we think about how important our brain is? Do you understand why now? Like, does this help at all to understand why I'm so passionate about fish oil? Because fish oil helps the brain. It's what the brain needs to function. It really does help the brain function, which controls all of those other things, right? The hippocampus is central to laying down memories. The name comes from the Greek for seahorse because of its supposed resemblance of that creature. That's interesting. They called it a hippocampus because it looked like a seahorse. The amygdala, Greek for almond, specializes in handling intense and stressful emotional fear, anxiety, phobias of all kinds, right? Yeah, we know about the amygdala. The amygdala grows particularly lively when we are asleep, and thus may account for why our dreams are so often disturbing. Your nightmares may simply be the amygdala unburdening themselves, the amygdala unburdening themselves. That's kind of interesting. When I read that part right there, I was like, you know, that's kind of what I was talking about with um, with the guy this morning in his definition of work is driving him crazy. It's like, how many times do we say to ourselves, how many times do we wake up in the morning after we've had a bad dream and describe it as an awesome event? Like, how many times do we say to ourselves, man, that was sweet. That was a sweet night right there. Like, my amygdala just unburdened themselves all night long. Whew, thank goodness. Now I can just move along. Right? We don't really do that. We don't define nightmares because we want to tell how bad those nightmares are. We want to tell our spouse, "Oh my gosh, you can't believe what I dreamed last night." Instead of, you know what I'm saying? It's like our life is based on our definitions. The way that we define things is how we're going to handle them. So if we define them as being negative, then we get negative responses through our brain and our physiology. But if we define things as as opportunities for us, or we define things as healthy mechanisms, then it changes it. I thought that was interesting. I thought that was a really cool. I never heard anybody say that before, but I thought that was a cool thing right there. So, um, considering how exhaustively the brain has been studied and for how long, it is remarkable how much elemental stuff we still don't know, or at least can't universally agree upon. Like, what exactly is consciousness? That's interesting, and that's what's so fun about my job is the more that I study it, the more I realize how little I know about it. It's like if you and I sometimes I'm like intimidated when I get against like up against not up against them, but when I get in the presence of true neurology guys that have studied it and memorized all the parts and all that sort of thing. It's like, man, it's like there's so much there that we just don't understand. Thinking is our most vital and miraculous talent, yet, in a profound physiological sense, we don't really know what thinking is. It's pretty true. Much the same could be said of memory. We know a good deal about how memories are assembled and how and where they are stored, but not why we keep some and not others. It clearly has little to do with the actual value or utility. This is kind of funny. He says, I can remember the entire starting lineup of the 1964 St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, something that has been of no importance to me since 1964, but actually but wasn't actually very useful then. And yet, I cannot recollect the number of my own cell phone or where I parked my car in a large parking lot or what was the third of three things my wife told me to get at the supermarket. Or any of the great many other things that are unquestionably more urgent and necessary than remembering the starting players for the 1964 Cardinals, who were, incidentally, Tim McCarver, Bill White, Julian Javier, Dick Grote, Ken Boyer, Lou Brock, Kurt Flood, and Mike Shannon. It's so funny. Like, he just remembers that. He remembers the 1964 St. Louis Cardinals, and he put it in his book. So there's a huge amount we have to learn, and many things we may never learn, but equally some of the things we do know, or at least as amazing as the things we don't. Consider how we see, or put it slightly more accurately, how the brain tells us what we see. That's super cool too, because your brain actually takes light impulses from your environment and it stitches it together to make a pattern inside. Just look around you now. The eyes send 100 billion signals to the brain every second. But that's only part of the story. When you see something, in parentheses, only about 10% of the information comes from the optic nerve. Other parts of your brain have to deconstruct the signals, recognize faces, interpret movements, identify danger. In other words, the biggest part of seeing isn't receiving visual images, it's making sense of them. Does that make sense? The biggest part of seeing isn't the actual physical input into the brain from the environment. The biggest part of seeing is after you get that information in your brain, what actually happened inside the brain to give you the picture. That's why it's so hard sometimes. We get so frustrated when we're trying to communicate to someone else and they're not getting it. They're not hearing what we say. They don't see the same thing that we see. And it's part of the reason is because of the way that we see it. And I'll give you a great example of that. I played football at Texas Tech under a tyrant. The quarterback coach that I had was a tyrant. I'm sure he was a good dude in his own right, and that's a definition, but he was a mean sucker. Like, he yelled at me every day for 4 years. He was a mean individual. And the pressure that I was under during the time that I was playing was so immense that I was about half the time, even when I got to be a senior, I was under so much pressure that it was like it was hard to deal with some days, and I was so scared to make a mistake that I didn't have any freedom to actually let it loose and play. And I graduated. We finished. We played in the Sun Bowl in 1993, and I finished that game. And in that spring, I came back and helped coach. And in the spring, when I came back and helped coach, it was so clear the defenses that we were like when I watched film that all of a sudden I could see things on film that I hadn't been able to see in 4 years of that pressure being on me. And it was the same identical visual stimulus coming from the film. Like, I was watching the same exact movie. I was seeing the same exact plays with the same exact defenses, but the way that I was breaking it down inside my head was completely different because of the amount of pressure that I was under as a player playing for this guy versus as a coach that was coaching with him. I could see it so clear. And since that time, now when I watch football games, I can see it so clearly. It's so much easier to look at defenses now when I didn't have all that pressure. And so that's what that little paragraph right there is trying to say. Other parts of your brain have to deconstruct the signals, recognize faces, interpret movements, identify danger. In other words, the biggest part of seeing isn't receiving visual images, it's making sense of them. It's how you process the information after it gets inside the brain that really is the most of what's going on. So that was really that was a great example that I could really resonate with that when I read it in the book, because I remember how clearly it was to see everything that he was trying to get me to see for 4 years, and mainly it was just the pressure that I was under. I had when he took the pressure off of me, my brain could work just fine, and I could see it very clearly. So um, that was an interesting deal. Hey, we're at the end of the show. We got through half of this chapter. I'm probably going to keep it going tomorrow night, maybe, and get to the other half of the chapter because I really think the other the chapters is pretty cool. So, if you guys want to, and especially it's about the brain. So, I hope you guys have a great night. I hope you have a fabulous Thursday, and we'll see you guys tomorrow night at 6.